How do you hack something? Oh, we all know the answer. You sit by the computer and bash the keyboard. Some numbers and symbols fly across the screen. If the bashing is intensive enough, success, you're in. It works on the movies and TV shows. It should work the same in real life. It doesn't. No matter how hard you try, no matter how many keyboards you break, you are not going to break good cybersecurity. For that, you need something special, a secret. And to get that secret, you have to become part of the deepest and darkest community on the internet. Forget your dark web marketplaces and hacker forums. It's deeper than that. It's a space whose entire existence rests on its covertness, where the world's best hackers trade secrets for life-changing sums of money, where governments, mega corporations, and criminal cartels compete over snippets of information that can change the world. Welcome to the Zero-Day Market. You're standing in front of a high and strong wall. How do you get to the other side? Walls like this are all over the internet. They guard the data of companies, nations, institutions, even people like you. When somebody purchases a gadget or an app, the wall is included in the price. People are paying for not getting hacked. But how do you hack things then? How do you get to the other side of that wall? Smaller walls can be scaled or broken through. That's what things like SQL injections and DDoS do. Most walls have an even easier access, just talking your way in. That's called social engineering. But for some, even the strongest brute force or the cleverest infiltration is not going to work. You need a better way in. You come closer and inspect the bricks. Maybe one of them is cracked or protrudes just enough to give you a foothold. Maybe it can be moved to reveal a secret passage. Windows 10 and Mac OS X, some of the most popular operational systems out there, have around 80 million lines of code. If each line was a brick, you could build nearly 300 miles of wall with them. 300 miles, 80 million bricks. What's the chance that one of them has a flaw? In the code, a flawed brick is a bug, a vulnerability that can be used and exploited, a hole in the system you can slip through. The companies that build walls don't want flawed bricks. The income of those companies depend on shipping a secure product. They have entire departments dedicated to finding flaws in the code and pay hefty sums of money to anyone who can reveal a bug. And whenever a company finds a vulnerability in its software, it issues a patch, a fix that replaces the brick and removes the vulnerability. So, the importance of a security flaw is measured by how long ago it was discovered. Week-old bugs are as good as patched. 2 or 3 days old ones are probably being exploited by every wannabe hacker out there, and the patch is already on the way. But if a company has no idea a bug exists, in other words, if it had known about a bug for 0 days, it's a whole other story. A useful 0 day is the holy grail of hacking. A secret vulnerability that can be exploited to breach the security of a device, or an app, or an entire network. Not only are you slipping right through the wall, nobody even suspects you're doing it. But good 0 days are hard to come by. To find one, you have to be better at spotting flaws than every single engineer hired by the wall building company. And even then, you may spend years staring at the code and looking for a useful flaw. Or you can look for someone who already did that. This is BugTrack, a mailing list that dates back to the early 90s, and the place you can find thousands of what used to be 0 days.
For a long time, hackers really had very little interest in money. And in the beginning, when they would find 0 day exploits, and when I say the beginning, I'm talking about mainly the 90s, they would go to the companies that had written this sloppy software, like HP, Oracle, Microsoft, Sun Microsystems, and they would say, hey, I found this bug in your software. It's a 0 day.
By the way, this is Nicole Perlarth. She's a New York Times journalist who spent years investigating the 0 day marketplace. and a lot of what we know about its history comes from her reporting. To create this story, we reached out to experts like her, who have actual hands-on experience. Finding and contacting them is a bit more difficult than it looks. The only reason we can do this is you, our viewers, and we are thankful for every token of appreciation you can give, be it a like, a subscribe, or a comment. A small gesture can go a long way. So, the early hackers would attempt to contact the companies and notify them about 0 days in their software.
And the companies, instead of looking at this as, oh, thank you for the free quality assurance, often replied with a letter from their general counsel saying, if you poke around our software again, we'll see to it that you go to prison. So,
BugTrack. You create a snappy handle, you hide behind a proxy, you take your 0 day and mail it to thousands of hackers across the world. The community gets valuable information, the company gets punished, and you get street cred. Sharing and exploring 0 days was a major part of the early hacker culture and a source of pride for many. But as the years went by, this state of things began changing into something unrecognizable. There is a wall, and you really need to get to the other side. You have money, you have connections, you have resources. All you need is a hint. You go to BugTrack and look for names. There is Mnemonics, Aleph One, Hacknisty, scores upon scores of handles, a lot of very skilled people who do a lot of work for free, but maybe some of them would like a bit of compensation. You choose one, an email, a polite, well-measured offer, and a sum, more than they earn in a year, more than the software company is willing to pay for the same bug. There are very few problems a bottomless budget can't solve. Years pass. You do the same again and again. You establish stronger connections, relationships, networks. Some of the people are reliable, others not so much. You keep the reliable ones close, the dangerous ones even closer. You are not the only one buying, and your contacts are not the only ones selling. A market begins to form and grow. Just by sending some emails, you get 0 days that can bypass any wall. And even if you have a problem finding sellers, there might be a solution to that. Middlemen emerge, 0 day brokers, companies with shady names and even shadier backgrounds willing to help you in your struggle. They can find whoever you need and conduct the transaction. They will even confirm if the merchandise works and vouch for its effectiveness.
They're very much a matchmaking service, right? Government, right, could go and post even, anonymously on Reddit or, some underground forum, hey, I want to go buy an exploit, right? But then you're dealing with some unknown party. You have issues around escrow, right? Both trust from the buyer side and trust from the seller side. And so these exploit brokers work as middlemen and matchmakers. They're holding stuff in escrow, and then they're confirming the vulnerability or holding funds in escrow, and then confirming the vulnerability actually works in many cases before even brokering the deal. And then, of course, for all those services, they take a percentage off the top.
So you buy a snippet of information from a broker or an anonymous hacker online. You confirm that the vulnerability works, and you develop an exploit, a piece of malware that can reliably turn one flawed piece of code into a safe passage through the wall. Time to use it. What you are looking at now is an exploit, not an actual one, but a reconstruction a researcher managed to piece together after scraping the remains of an attack on his phone. It's designed to infect iPhones through an invisible iMessage. The user never gets a notification, not even a blip on the screen. A snippet of code just slips in and stays completely silent. It begins working through a particular bug, a flaw that existed in Apple's software for decades, a remnant of a function that has long been discontinued, a deformed brick that once supported a wall but no longer does. After slipping through, the code takes over a small part of the phone's memory, just enough to get some minor things done. Using this memory, the message finds another, larger hole in the wall, another 0 day through which an even more malicious code can be brought through. It's unexploitable from outside, but once you're in, you can use it. The new code is more potent, and it begins a war on the phone's native systems. A short battle rages under the fingers of the unsuspecting user until the invading code uses yet another vulnerability, one that allows it to bypass all defenses. In several seconds, the iPhone is conquered. Finally, one more vulnerability is used to gain access and take over the Safari browser. Now, the phone is at the mercy of the intruder and will report everything the owner does, sees, or hears. A string of 4 0 days, an entire attack chain tied together by some very well-written code, giving you unrestricted access to any iPhone on the planet. The researchers called this chain Operation Triangulation, a weird name for an attack that has 4 prongs, not 3, but who are we to judge? Weird naming aside, these exploits are incredibly potent and incredibly dangerous. And to get that sort of capability, you have to pay the price. Just like with almost anything on an open market, the price is a reflection of the usefulness. One of the very few glimpses we get into the cost of attacks like Operation Triangulation is a list by Zerodium, a major broker company that actually publishes its prices. According to Zerodium, a 0 day that allows you to bypass a phone's passcode or a PIN nowadays is up to $100,000. A 0 day that allows you to access their chat application, a web browser, or an email could cost up to $500,000. 0 days that give you access to somebody's phone without any interaction on their part can net $2 to $2.5 million. So, millions of dollars to break into a phone. And that's not even counting the salaries of the small army of hackers who wrote the exploit, making the 0 day usable. These are not the amounts of money you pay to keep tabs on your cheating fiancé. The people who use these attacks aim a lot higher.
The biggest demographic of buyers, on open markets is probably governments. I mean, they have money that cyber criminals, can't touch, or can't possibly amass, even some of these larger ransomware gangs. And the value, right, that they get out of the intelligence that they gain with these 0 days is not measured in dollars and cents either.
Some 0 days are harmless. You find a mistake in the code and it might be in a system which is not widely used, or if it's even used by some niche audience, it's not that interesting, not worth your effort to break into that system. But the systems that hackers and nation states spend a lot of time on right now are iPhone software, Android software that touches critical infrastructure, software that touches, like I said, cryptocurrency systems, wallets that could get you a lot of cash in cryptocurrency.
We may never know the actual cost of Operation Triangulation. There's only a small handful of broker companies that publish their prices, and countless more that don't. The actual cost of a 0 day, let alone an exploit, can vary a lot. A good example of that is Operation Zero, a broker that popped up just a few years ago. In September 2023, it offered the highest price for an exploit that has ever been recorded, $20 million for an attack chain. Things like Operation Triangulation could cost at least as much, or even more. All of that to give you access to a phone, a small device that tracks its users. But some targets of such attacks are bigger. Another 0 day bought for a similar price might net you an entrance to a desktop computer, or an industrial controller, or an entire network that maintains infrastructure of a factory, a military base, a city. Stuxnet, one of the most advanced examples of malware, used a string of 4 0 days to enter an Iranian nuclear facility and disable it. NotPetya, the most damaging cyber attack ever recorded, used one single 0 day to paralyze an entire country for several days, causing billions of dollars worth of damage to international companies that operated there. The phone of Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist murdered by the Saudi Arabian government in 2018, was monitored and tracked by the government after infecting his devices through 0 days. So far, we've been comparing a 0 day to a flaw in a wall, a brick that reveals a hidden entrance. This comparison is quite harmless, maybe a bit too harmless. A 0 day could also be compared to a weapon, or more correctly, a material from which a weapon can be made, a more powerful weapon than almost anything in the world. With the right set of 0 days, a government can wage cyber war against both competing governments and its own citizens. For a government with enough funds to buy such a collection and enough skilled personnel to correctly exploit it, any security is no longer an obstacle. And most of these zero days have at some point been traded on the zero-day market. They were bought, sold, and shared. This happens every day, right there under the noses of law enforcement, regulators, and corporations that can't and won't do anything to fight it. Why? How is trading zero days even legal? And why nobody treats it with at least a fraction of the seriousness people treat the sale of weapons of mass destruction? Well, the answer to that is a bit complicated. The zero-day market is a sprawling structure with several levels and a huge variety of players. It seems harmless on the surface. Nowadays, unlike 20 or 30 years ago, lots of companies offer bug bounty programs. They pay for any vulnerabilities found in their software, encouraging hackers to earn their income legally and make the internet more secure in the process. Some firms and researchers do the same, but independently. They look for bugs in the code of popular software and notify the vendors. Sometimes they get paid. In any case, they get exposure, the corporate version of hackers' street cred. This is how the white market works, the tip of the iceberg, something most people mean when they talk about zero days. But there is a level below that, the part of the market where companies don't have catchy names and aren't too fond of being noticed, where researchers don't advertise their findings, and a lot of them get redacted.
You can go search LinkedIn and find people that are, hiring contractors, right, that are hiring for vulnerability research, requiring security clearance. That's not an anomaly in the U.S. But make no mistake about it, right? All governments are either researching these or purchasing them, and probably some combination thereof.
This is the gray market. Strictly speaking, it's not legal, but it's not illegal either. The governments are investing in research and hiding what they find from the public. They pay the hackers for their silence and use the zero days for spying and cyber warfare. It's hard to comprehend, morally dubious, and entirely unregulated. But there's a level below that too.
Finally, we have the black market, which is sometimes governments, if there are international regulations limiting their ability to buy zero-day exploits on the gray market. A lot of illegal activity goes on black market, and the value is much higher than white market. Could be 10 to 100 times as high for exploits as on the white market. So you will find a lot of international crime networks and organizations, some rogue governments, non-state actors of various types operating there illicitly.
Recently, the world witnessed a very telling example of exactly that. This is an app called MoveIt, a file transfer protocol similar to WeTransfer or OneDrive. It has a boring interface and a moderate market share. Safe to say, you've probably never used it. Unless you worked at a major corporation or a government office. Before 2023, most of its clients were the big shots, the likes of Shell, Sony, and the US Department of Energy. In June 2023, Clop, a major ransomware gang, acquired a zero-day vulnerability in MoveIt software. Immediately, it was used to breach the service and steal the data of all its clients. And what resulted was the largest ransomware attack in recent years. Clop's list includes over 2,500 companies and nearly 90 million people, more than the population of such countries as Germany or France. Clop began extorting the companies, threatening to release their secrets if they didn't pay ransom. We'll never know how many companies budged, but the payouts quite certainly made a lot of criminals very, very rich, all thanks to one single zero day.
So it started with nation states and their contractors. And like most of these techniques and tools, it has now migrated to cyber criminals. And over the past few years, we've seen cyber criminals use zero-day exploits in various ransomware attacks or hacks of cryptocurrency exchanges, wallets, and that kind of thing.
So that's the black part of the zero-day market. With it, the whole thing seems quite neat and organized. You have the good guys who work openly and hunt for zero days to expose them and make everyone safer. You have governments and shady companies who trade zero days to stay on top of the cyber warfare game. And you have the criminal organizations that buy 0 days to steal data. You can read all about this on Wikipedia, or, well, anywhere. But this structure is clear only from the surface. When you begin looking at the market closer, the lines begin to blur, and things get worse. Let's get back to Operation Triangulation, an exploit that used 4 0 days to gain access to any iPhone. This operation was discovered after researchers at Kaspersky, a Russian cybersecurity company, accidentally detected its traces on their phones. The researchers admitted it is the most complex and most advanced attack they've ever dealt with. It has all the telltale signs of a state-sponsored hacker army, and a very powerful one at that. At the same time, the Federal Security Service, the Russian analog of America's NSA, announced discovering the same attack patterns on thousands of phones of Russian government officials. The service said they managed to identify the attacker, American intelligence agencies, who spied on Russian citizens in this unparalleled international attack. According to the FSB, such an attack had to be coordinated with Apple, which would not allow bugs like those to remain in their systems without any reason. But then there is Operation Zero, the company which offered $20 million for the same attack chain, hinting that the attack is more than possible without Apple's input. Just like with most vendors, we know very little about Operation Zero. But one thing we know, and it's a thing the company is out loud and proud about, is that it sells its exploits only to Russian intelligence agencies and companies. Another thing we know is that it was founded by a former employee of Kaspersky, the same company that was later attacked by Operation Triangulation. For a citizen of the United States, selling a 0 day to Zerodium, which would pass it on to the NSA, would be the work on the gray market. To sell the same bug to Operation Zero, the citizen would have to enter the black market. And for a Russian hacker who discovered the same 0 day, the situation would be strictly reversed. Contacting Operation Zero would make them a millionaire, and contacting Zerodium would likely land them in jail. But only a small minority of hackers live in the United States or Russia. Every country in the world aims to get an edge in cyberspace, and each one of them sets its own rules in accordance with its alignment. Each one has its own white, gray, and black markets, and thanks to the world being as interconnected as it is, absolutely nothing prevents one government from reaching out to a black market of another.
Governments that are not looking for morally dubious things generally use gray and white markets to get those types of vulnerabilities. If they go on the black market, it's really because they can't get to it in any other way, and it gets pretty complicated.
Both Zerodium and Operation Zero are pretty straightforward. They sell to their governments and are transparent about it. But when it comes to brokers, those two are an exception. Most companies that trade in 0 days work entirely in the shade. What they sell and who they sell to and who works for them is a total secret. And from what we know, they often use that to blur the lines between the markets even more, either on accident or not entirely so.
They may actually sell to not sanctioned regimes, because that would obviously be illegal, but they probably aren't doing like as much due diligence as you might otherwise, want. And they might even, in some cases, through that lack of due diligence, be working with, some possibly unwittingly with some cyber criminal.
But then we have these high profile incidents where groups like Hacking Team, which was based in Milan, Italy, get hacked themselves. And we say, oh, they're selling to African nations that have horrific human rights records, or to Russia, which might not have initially fit these hackers' moral calculus on who's a good country, who's a bad country, who has free press and who doesn't.
And thanks to all this secrecy and all of this blurring, imposing any kind of regulation on the 0 day market, or even going after anybody who crosses the line, becomes nearly impossible.
Prosecuting somebody who is, themselves anonymous and who facilitates anonymous purchases is very complicated. Even when you know the parties involved, and no one likes doing that because they also want to see brokers as sources of information. So for them, it's better to give the broker immunity and get them to cough up whatever they know about the deal than to go after them and make additional parties with an interest to cover everything up even more. That's why they're not very likely to be prosecuted.
And this is how the zero-day market operates, with no regulation, with no prosecution, always on the border of legality and morality. It is sprawling and complex, and at the same time, mostly invisible and entirely opaque. For people who first learn about it, it's difficult to have any kind of positive reaction. After all, we are speaking about the underground sale of weapons that can be, and sometimes are, used against every one of us. So, an urge to regulate or straight up ban can be overwhelming, no matter how difficult or impossible that might seem. But there can be a different perspective on this, a perspective held by a lot of people who used to work in intelligence agencies and witness what governments use their 0 days for.
Yeah, this one's a rather complex one for me. I don't speak purely from opinion. A little bit of it's from experience. I think it's well known at this point, that I'm a former intelligence professional and a former government hacker, right? And so, I've seen firsthand the value of retaining an O-Day purely for offensive purposes. Of course, there's a risk there, right? And that's why the U.S. government, has the vulnerability equities process, where, very smart people, very smart and very educated people from across different agencies in the government meet about 0 days that we have knowledge of and may or may not have weaponized, may be available for sale, what have you, and discuss the value of using it for intelligence versus the value of making our infrastructure safe, right? And globally infrastructure safe. It's a bit complex for me. I absolutely can't side with the folks that say all 0 days are evil. Right? That can't be the case.
What you're looking at now is a theoretical exploit of a vulnerability in PHP, a scripting language that forms the backbone of the internet, both the visible one, such as the page you are on right now, and the invisible one, the dark web, a place you've probably heard of. Websites and servers there are based on the same principles as regular websites, and they're susceptible to the same vulnerabilities. Sometime in late 2023, somebody, somewhere, discovered a cracked brick in the wall that forms a part of PHP. We don't know who that was and why they did it. Maybe they found the 0 day themselves, maybe they bought it on the market. And then they took that cracked brick and turned it into a passage. With that passage, they could have accessed any server, overtake any website in the world. But the website they did attack looked like this. It's the dark web blog of Lockbit, one of the largest criminal organizations in the world. In several years of their existence, Lockbit attacked thousands of people and extorted billions after stealing their data and demanding ransom. At the height of their activity, they comprised almost half of the entire ransomware market in the world. In early 2024, Lockbit was taken down. Their whole infrastructure, spanning dozens of servers and the accounts of hundreds of cybercriminals, was taken over by a combined task force of law enforcement from 11 countries. They hit the gang so hard that it practically had to recreate itself anew, and might never return to the top of the food chain. And this entire operation was, most likely, conducted thanks to a 0 day. So yes, it can be difficult to admit, but sometimes the governments and law enforcement agencies just do their job, and sometimes that job requires a well-placed exploit.
Well, it could be unethical, but the problem is it works both ways. Yes, it could facilitate governments looking to spy on opposition members, journalists, and so forth. And there are many campaigns constantly attacking governments and companies for doing exactly that. It could also be the reverse. It could be other governments going after the oppressive governments and trying to cause them problems. It could also be private initiatives looking for exploits to attack these governments, such as what anonymous affiliates were doing against Russia during the war with Ukraine. So if you start going after this market, it will end up hurting both sides, and more likely the governments will win anyway in that scenario because they have more money to spend. They're not operating at a risk. When they enter those markets, they will use third parties who they'll burn, but then they'll find somebody else.
So, everything is a lot blurrier than it might seem. The zero-day market is a huge, tangled mess of legal and moral questions, of companies that sell to criminals and governments alike, of agencies that seek exploits and pay millions but call it illegal to use the same exploits against them, of criminals attacking governments and governments attacking criminals, and of hackers who are the source of it all, people who earn their living staring into the wall. Most of the zero-day market is completely secret, but after all, we know about it, right? So somebody is definitely breaking the first rule of Fight Club. Sometimes it's former government employees who say as much as they can without crossing the line. Sometimes it's brokers who want to attract attention, both from potential sellers and buyers. And sometimes it's hackers themselves who decide to talk despite what others tell them.
As I document in the book, there are various cases where certain brokers, there was a very famous one based in Thailand. I don't know where he is now, the Gruk. He's a very well-respected member of the hacking community. Spoke to a Forbes reporter, a friend of mine, Andy Greenberg, at one point and thought he was speaking off the record. Basically, the Gruk shared a lot of information. Price lists, some rules of the game. At one point, even posed for a photo next to a duffel bag, which I don't know whether there was actual cash in it, but it looked like there was cash in it. I don't know if it was real or not. And from what I understand, after that appeared, he was visited by Thai police. And basically, according to friends and colleagues of his, lost half his business because there were a lot of governments who had been buying 0 days from him who said, I don't want to do business with someone who's going to pose next to a duffel bag of cash in Forbes magazine. That is the antithesis of who I want to be working with. And so that became a very public example to other 0-day brokers that they would do well to keep their mouths shut.
We tried contacting Grug for this story, and it seems he learned his lesson. Just like almost any 0-day seller or broker you can find on the internet, some of them have public profiles, some reveal some details of their operations, some even share their names.
But the overwhelming majority have to operate through multiple layers of encryption. And when you get to that point of secrecy, there's just no way to know who you're dealing with. And frankly, it's dangerous for you to know, and that's why it's done particularly in that way.
So the reason why no one wants to talk about this is, one, their customers require complete discretion. No government wants to purchase a 0-day from someone who's out there mouthing off about what they have, who they're selling it to. They need to be able to trust these people to keep these sales quiet. So discretion is critical.
Which is why, while we know a lot about the 0-day market, there's much more we don't, and probably never will, even despite the impact it has and will have on our lives. So, there you go, the 0-day market, the digital underworld full of elite hackers and horrific secrets, a world that sometimes spills into our reality, causing massive harm. But also, a world that is inseparably intertwined with ours, with ties that simply can't, and probably won't, be broken. The walls are built by people, and as long as that happens, some bricks in them will be flawed. And as long as there are flawed bricks, there will be people who will pay money to have them found. And so, the 0-day market will persist. We hope you enjoyed this short dive into another extremely complicated topic. We're very thankful to Nicole Perlorth, whose book on 0 days served as an inspiration for this story. Don't hesitate to give a chance to our other explainers. We cover all things cyber, and usually upload one every other week. Stay informed, and have a nice day.